Ayatollah Khamenei was talking to some ulema in a function and made some rather gratuitous remarks on India. This hasn't been taken well in India. The MEA has reacted. Khamenei tries to link up India and the condition of Muslims in India with what is happening in Myanmar or in Palestine. When he says something, you cannot entirely ignore him. The mullahs in Iran have reduced Islam to only the hijab. The hardcore Islamists or the real establishment of the Islamic regime, you have the regular government, dealing in a much more civilized manner. When the Iranian supreme leader talks of the condition of Muslims in India, Iran needs to be asked about its own human rights record. Iran has virtually wiped out all the religious minorities. Just a couple of days back, the Iranian supreme leader, Ayatollah Khamenei, was talking to some ulema in a function and made some rather gratuitous remarks on India, clubbing India with what is happening in Myanmar and the current ongoing conflict in between Israel and the Palestinians in Gaza, or between Israel and Hamas. But frankly, this hasn't been taken well in India. The MEA has reacted to that statement where Khamenei tries to link up India and the condition of Muslims in India with what is happening in Myanmar or in Palestine. The fact of the matter remains that this is not the first time that Khamenei has made a statement like this, which has riled India, but we've always kind of played it a little soft. We've issued a regular anodyne kind of statement, but haven't gone beyond that. Now, frankly, when somebody like Khamenei says this, one could write it off as the ravings and rantings of a senile old man, but I think that would be a mistake, because he is, after all, the supreme leader in Iran. He is the final authority in Iran, and surely when he says something, you cannot entirely ignore him. Of course, what he says on human rights or anything else has absolutely no resonance in rest of the world, because after all, it's coming from Iran, and it's rather rich coming from Iran, which has a very dubious kind of a record when it comes to human rights, when it comes to rights of minorities, or even religious rights. So, for example, the mullahs in Iran have reduced Islam to only the hijab, and the mullahs in Iran think that they can show their machismo and their adherence to Islam or their commitment to Islam by beating, torturing and incarcerating women, even if there is a slight display of hair by them. So this is what the Iranians have made of them. Their democracy, to call Iran a democracy would be a travesty. It's like saying that China is indeed a republic, or that the Democratic People's Republic of Korea, which is North Korea, is actually a democracy. So frankly, Iran fits into that kind of a system. But I think what is happening in Iran is also a kind of a good cop, bad cop routine which is being followed. So you have the hardcore Islamists or the real establishment of the Islamic regime, which is Khamenei and the IRGC and the others, who take a somewhat more strident position, and then you have the regular government, which actually works under the establishment. You have the regular government, dealing in a much more civilized manner. So there is this good cop, bad cop routine, and India has been doing business with Iran for very long. It's a mutually beneficial relationship as far as it goes. But this good cop, bad cop routine, I think, is not going to work endlessly. Especially if you have the Iranian supreme leader comment on India and comment on India in rather disparaging terms. So I think there is this growing problem which is going to be coming, and frankly, I think when the Iranian supreme leader talks of the condition of Muslims in India, I think this entire thing needs to be pushed back, and Iran needs to be asked about its own human rights record when it comes to not just women but also sectarian minorities. For example, in the Sistan Balochistan province, there is a kind of a silent genocide of the Baloch going on, who are predominantly Sunni, or almost all of them are Sunni Muslims, and the Iranian regime, being a Shiite regime, is actually not entirely very well disposed towards the sect. So in Sistan Balochistan, it's a kind of a double whammy, because one, they are ethnically not Iranians, they are Baloch, and secondly, they are Sunnis. The same thing you will see when it comes to the Azeris, or when it comes to the Kurds, or some of the other ethnic minorities in Iran. Iran has virtually wiped out all the religious minorities. Here we are just talking about ethnic and sectarian minorities, but the religious minorities in Iran have been wiped out. And frankly, for Iran to then talk about Muslims in India without knowing that there are hundreds, maybe thousands of Iranians, Muslims incidentally, who have actually taken refuge in India. They've come, they've continued to extend their visas, they have settled down in India, they're doing business in India. They don't want to go back to this regime in Iran. They find India a far more comforting place for them. They don't want to go to the West. So India is a perfect mix of the East and West, and many of the Iranians have settled in India. Now, if indeed India was such an unsafe place for Muslims, why would Iranian Muslims be coming and settling in India? But of course, these are inconvenient questions which somebody like Khamenei will not dare to answer or even ask himself. India's relation, we've had a somewhat complex relationship with Iran. Iran, we keep talking about how good our relationship has been, the civilizational links, the historical links. All of that is a load of hogwash. That's the kind of, spin that you put over a relationship, which has not always been ideal. Because after all, if you talk about historical relationship and you start doing a deep dive into history, then it's not been a very pleasant historical relationship with Iran. But the thing is that in the last few decades, we've had a mixed relationship. So when we've had our wars with Pakistan, for example, the Iranians have never supported us. Whether it was 65, it was 71, the Iranians always backed the Pakistanis on the Islamic network. So if one of the calculations in India is that by having closer relations with Iran, we will be able to counterbalance Pakistan, I think that's a mistake we are making. We've always made these mistakes, we continue to make them. But Iran is in that sense not exactly a close friend of India. There are times when our interests converge. For example, they converged on Afghanistan during Taliban 1.0. When we were working together to prop up the Northern Alliance. But even at that point of time, the Iranians were not exactly the most reliable partners that India had. If you ask the old-timers who were involved in that particular support that we were giving to the Afghans who were resisting the Taliban at that point of time, the Iranians always tried to interfere, tried to obstruct, tried to play a fiddle in whatever aid was going. They tried to play favorites, all kinds of things they were doing. Incidentally, when we're talking about Muslims, there are many Afghan refugees who have taken refuge in Iran in recent years, and look at the kind of treatment that the Iranians mete out to Muslims. So I think this thing that when a Muslim oppresses a Muslim, it's perfectly kosher for the supreme leader of Iran. But otherwise it's not okay. So it's halal if a Muslim does it to a Muslim, but otherwise, if there is any social tension in a multicultural, multi-religious society, then he will take cudgels on behalf of the Muslims. He does not bothered about what happens to the Afghan refugees. He is also not bothered about what happens to the Muslims in China, who are being put into concentration camps, being force-fed with pork, all kinds of other indignities being visited upon them, because out there Iran's strategic interests get involved. So in a sense, even for the mullahs in Iran, like the mullahs in Pakistan, Islam is very fungible. You can twist it around the way you want to do it, depending on your convenience. Now this is what they've been doing. So yes, India has been having a very close relationship with Iran. We've cooperated on a number of in a number of fields. But let's also not or forget rather the fact that Iran has also been interfering in India. We've seen that in the past in Kashmir, where there is a sizable Shia population, that the Iranians have tried to insert themselves out there. In parts of Uttar Pradesh, in Lucknow and other places where the Shia community is present in significant numbers, the Iranians have tried to make inroads out there. So they've tried to play a fiddle in Indian politics. They have also carried out terrorist attacks in India. We remember the attack on the Israeli diplomat, and we traced it back to the Iranians. The Indians, however, played it down. We did all the investigations, we identified the people, but beyond a point we didn't pursue it because we didn't want to embarrass Iran. But I think that was a mistake. I think we should have told Iran at that point of time where it gets off. Maybe it was done behind closed doors, but perhaps we should have done a little more, because the Iranian leader has been doing this often enough, and frankly now it's becoming intolerable. But the Iranians have sponsored terrorism in India. We have played it down, and I don't think we should have done this, because I think one of the maxims of international relations, at least this is a maxim which I have learned, is that no good turn in international relations goes unpunished. No good deed goes unpunished in international relations, and of course, when we did a good deed for the Iranians, they are punishing us by asking their supreme leader to make these kind of remarks against India. So I think we need to be mindful of how this works. On the relationship now, there has to be reciprocity in a relationship. If we want good relations, that is possible only if the Iranians adhere to the norms of how relations are to be maintained with India. Because if the Iranians think that it's a free lunch for them, that they can abuse India, they can disparage India, and there will be no pushback, it's a costless option for them, then I'm afraid this relationship is not going to go very far. If we are developing, for example, the Chabahar port, it is as much in the benefit of Iran as it is for India's benefit. So I don't think we are doing them a favor or they are doing us a favor. Iran in any case is pretty isolated. If India goes and works in Iran, and incidentally, despite all the pressures on India from the international community, from the West, from including some of our Arab friends, we've continued to interact with Iran. We've not broken our relations with Iran. Yes, we've had to succumb to some of the threats of sanctions, but that again is entirely understandable. Look, let's face it. What does Iran actually bring to the table? Yes, we talk about a strategic convergence on a couple of issues, but are those issues critical for India's survival? I don't think so. even at the best of times, our trade with Iran was about 10, 12, 14 billion dollars. Much of it was oil that we imported from Iran. Now, compare that to our trade with the Arab Gulf states. We have a large diaspora in the Arab world. We have our energy security in the Arab Gulf states. We get a lot of, our trade flows through these areas, which incidentally is now being disrupted by Iran, which has proved to be one of the most destabilizing players in the region. Iran's involvement in Yemen, in Iraq, in Lebanon, in Syria has actually, completely destabilized the region. And now the latest, the firing of missiles, for example, on shipping in the Red Sea has disrupted international shipping. So Iran has played a very negative role. Despite that, we've maintained our relationship with Iran, but if we have to stack up between Iran and the Arab Gulf states, or even with Israel, or even with the West, it doesn't compare. Our trade with the West, with the Arab Gulf states, with Israel, is like at least 10 times more than what our trade with Iran is. So clearly, I think Iran needs to understand where it gets off. I think we need to understand that we need to tell Iran where it gets off. I don't think we can allow the Iranians to get away with the kind of stuff they've been doing. As far as India is concerned, this good cop, bad cop routine has, I think, run its course. Iran clearly thinks that there is a kind of a tussle for leadership in the Islamic world. And Iran is one of the contenders. There are broadly three contenders. One is, of course, the Arab Gulf states, essentially Saudi Arabia and to an extent the United Arab Emirates. Both these places led by very visionary, very progressive leaders, Mohammed bin Salman and the ruling family in the UAE, remarkable leaders, very forward-looking, and people with whom a lot of business can be done. So that is one pole in the Islamic world. But because they are reformist, because they are progressive, they are finding it a little difficult in getting the resonance from the Islamic street. The second is, of course, Turkey, where there's a wannabe caliph in Erdogan. But I think Turkey has also kind of run its course. It has some influence, but not too much. Its economy is in a shambles. So Turkey is not really in a position to take over the mantle of leadership. And then, of course, it's the Iranians who are trying to take over the leadership of the Islamic world through their radical ideology, through the kind of proxy wars they are carrying out in the region, and they think that this will catapult them, into the leadership position. But I think the sectarian factor will go against them. There will be a pushback from the rest of the Islamic world. The important point from India's point of view is that the supreme leader in Iran thinks that, as part of this ploy of taking over the mantle of leadership of the Islamic world, India is an easy target. It's a soft target. You abuse India, you can get away with it because there's no real cost attached to abusing India. And I think it's about time that we disabuse the Iranians of this notion that it's not going to be a costless option if you're going to be targeting India on something as sensitive as our internal affairs, especially on things which are not even true. Of course, there are social tensions in India, there are communal tensions in India, just as there are racial tensions and communal tensions in the United States or in other countries of the world. Similarly, there are these tensions in India as well. In India's case, they are being telescoped and they are being projected as though some great or grave injustice is being committed, which is far from being the case. Nevertheless, I think it is about time that India does not take this thing lying down. The statement which the MEA has issued is, it's quite inane, really. It's such a pro forma kind of a statement that it's like water off a duck's back. And frankly, if we think that this is going to be the pushback from India's side, I think the sooner we disabuse ourselves of that, the better it will be. If we really want this kind of interference from Iran to stop, I think our reaction needs to be a lot more severe than what it has been so far.